Excellent. Good morning. I hope you guys can hear me well. I hope you can see my presentation. My name is Jeff Gothelf, and I apologize that I'm not with you in person. I did my best to be there with you in person, but there was an airline strike. Without pilots, the planes don't fly, and unfortunately, I couldn't make it to Budapest on time. So I apologize for not being there in person. I'm glad we have a chance to discuss this via web conference. And I encourage you to reach out to me with any questions after the talk. If you don't have, if you don't get your questions answered while we've got our time together today, because I won't be around obviously during the day. I want to tell you a little story this morning about the summer of 1995. In the summer of 1995, I graduated from university and I took my first job. My first job was with the circus. I packed up all my stuff. I graduated on a Saturday. I took all my stuff, which was essentially my motorcycle, my mattress, and my Bob Marley poster, and I put it into storage, and I joined the circus. On Monday, I went with the circus, and I spent 6 months with this circus. In fact, the picture on your screen is the circus that I was with. It's called the Clyde Beatty Cole Brothers Circus, and at the time, in 1995, it was the largest three-ring tented circus in the United States. Very traditional circus. I spent 6 months on the road. We worked every day, 2 shows a day, 3 shows on Saturdays with no days off. So over the course of 6 months, I saw the circus 400 times in a row. Now, in your travels in the circus, you meet a lot of very interesting people as you travel through the United States, and you do this. One interesting person that I met was this guy. That's Steven Tyler from Aerosmith, right there. And the guy sitting next to him, that's me, with hair. That was 20 years ago. I had a lot of hair back then. Interesting guy, comes to the circus all the time. Another really interesting person that I met in my travels was this guy. This is the human cannonball. Now, if you can't see him in the picture, that's him right there, getting ready to get loaded up into the cannon. Now, this guy worked 4 minutes every day, 2 minutes per show, 2 shows a day. He worked 4 minutes every day, and that's it. And so he had a lot of free time. And in that free time, I spent hanging out with him. And he told me the story of how he became the human cannonball, because as you can imagine, there's no LinkedIn for human cannonballs. And so, as you can probably guess, the story of this human cannonball starts with the previous human cannonball. And to tell you the story, you have to understand how this contraption works. So you can see the cannon. The cannon's mounted on a truck. Now, this is 1995, and these guys have been doing this for 30 years. The way this works is they would, the circus comes to a new town, they set up the tent, they drive the truck into the tent, they aim the cannon, they put a mannequin, a dummy, a big doll, into the cannon, they shoot the dummy weighs the same as the previous human cannonball, they shoot the dummy, and then wherever it lands, that's where they put up the net to catch the human cannonball. Not very scientific, but it worked. It worked year after year, night after night, night after night. One night, they get to the circus lot a little late. And the tent gets set up and it starts to rain. And they didn't have time to test the cannon that night. And so they waited until the morning and they left the dummy, the mannequin, they left it outside overnight and it rained. The next day, they took the wet dummy, they put it in the cannon, they fired it, and then wherever it landed, they put up the net. That afternoon, in front of 4,000 children, the previous human cannonball climbs in the cannon, waves goodbye to the kids. The ringmaster hits the button, he gets shot out of the cannon, and he sails way past the net, lands on the floor. But the good news is that he didn't die. He was horribly injured, though, and he went home to Florida to recover, which is where all circuses come from in the United States. I don't know if you knew that. And this guy on your screen was the guy who cleaned his pool. That was his pool boy. And he said, would you like to, get a promotion from pool boy to human cannonball? And so that's how this guy got his job. Now, why am I telling you the story? First of all, it's fascinating. I don't know how many circus stories you know. But most importantly is this. Night after night, the previous human cannonball had a series of assumptions that he made about how he ran his business and he did his work. And he assumed that those assumptions were true night after night after night. And he didn't actually test them, that the dummy weighed the same, that the net should go up in the same place. And the assumptions changed. And when the assumptions changed and he didn't test them, he failed. In his case, horribly failed. And the same thing is true for our businesses today. The assumptions that we have today and even yesterday about our business are changing, and they don't work in today's realities. The nature of our businesses, the nature of technology changes, and the way that we run and build and design and manage our teams changes in today's realities. And what's fascinating is that it doesn't matter how successful you've been in the past, right? Let me show you my favorite case study. How many of you have an Amazon Fire Phone? Go ahead, light up the screen and show it to the camera. Yeah, that's what I thought. I don't see a single light on the screen. This is Jeff Bezos, one of the most successful entrepreneurs of all time, right? He's built the largest e-commerce company in the world. He's built a cloud services company. He's building delivery with drones and reusable rockets. And he decides he wants to build a phone. And so he hires a team, and he assumes that he knows best. He throws out the customer. He assumes that everything should be built for him. And they build a phone, and they ship it. And this is launch day. This photo's from launch day. And nobody buys it. And the company lost $170 million in unsold inventory. And when they did a little bit of investigative journalism into why this happened, they asked the people that worked on this project why this happened and why this took place. And they asked the team that worked on it. And this is a quote from Fast Company, one of the more interesting articles about this. And they said, why did you make all these decisions? Why did you make these product choices? Why did you make these design choices? And over and over and over again, the answer was, because Jeff wants it. That's it. Right? Now, if you set aside for a second that he's the boss, right, you can't blame these people for doing what he wants. Look at his track record. He's built the largest e-commerce company in the world, the largest web services company in the world. I mean, not one of the largest web services providers in the world. If he wants a phone, let's build the man a phone. He's been right before. He'll be right again. But this is a clear illustration that every new project has a new set of assumptions, and with it, a new set of risks. And if you don't test, if you don't continually learn and improve on those assumptions, you're going to get it wrong. And sometimes you're going to get it wrong in a huge way. Now, what's interesting is that Bezos acknowledges this. And in a more recent interview, this is this year, back earlier this year in Business Insider, he said, look, this is the way that we work. This is a big failure for us, but we're a big company. We have to take these risks because that's the kind of experimentation that we need to do to grow at our scale. If you're not going to be innovating and inventing at scale, you can't actually move the needle as your company expands. And so he builds these kinds of projects and these kinds of teams that can run these experiments at scale to make sure that they're always testing and moving forward. Now, the reality that underlies all of this for us is that software is eating the world, and it's really eaten the world. It's fundamentally changed everything about our business, right? The assumptions that we make about our business aren't true anymore, right? Everything is software. If you're a business that is looking to scale or a business of scale in the 21st century, you're in the software business first. And understanding that is critical to thinking about how you structure your teams, how you staff them, and how you manage them. Because software is consuming everything, right? If you think about companies like Amazon, for example, what business are they in, right? Are they in the books business or the movies business or the electronics business? No, they're a software company first. They're in customer intelligence. They're in inventory management and logistics. And then they happen to sell you whatever it is that you actually want. Now, what's interesting, the desire to embrace digital transformation as the savior under this mantra of innovation is huge across the organizations. Every company wants to be an innovative company. They want to drive digital transformation. And it's seductive, right? It's powerful. People can see the potential in this, but very few companies know how to harness software and truly transform it, their businesses using it, right? My favorite example of this comes from the 19th century. In the 19th century, in a book called The Second Machine Age, American factories were undergoing electrification. And people were replacing steam power with electric motors. Now, the first thing that they did was they simply took the electric motors and plugged them in the same exact way that the steam engines were plugged in. And so they saw very little productivity gain. Like the fuel they were using was different, but the teams weren't working differently, right? And it wasn't until 20 to 30 years later that some entrepreneurial, innovative thinkers, managers, realized that realigning the factory, by redesigning the factory, the way that the factory was laid out and the way that the people worked in the factory and the way that they engaged with this new technology, could they see the kind of productivity gains that they were looking for with electric motors. They had to reorient literally the physical position of the machines in the factory. Nobody saw that for the first 20 or 30 years. And the same thing is happening with technology. People are plugging it in as the manufacturing engine of their companies, but not really thinking about how it changes the way that people work around them. And we've seen this time and time and time again in a variety of different industries and a variety of different companies, right? Napster, you guys remember Napster? Napster, everybody was terrified of Napster because they thought they were giving music away for free. And the incumbent players didn't see it. They saw it as a threat to their business, not as a new way of doing business. And they tried to shut it down. The Recording Industry Association of America was the big leading organization to shut down Napster, music sharing, music streaming, right? And you saw prominent artists like this guy. This is Lars Ulrich from Metallica, right? Railing against Spotify. This is going to destroy music. It's never going to be the same, right? Except today, guess what, right? I just listened to his brand new record on Spotify this week, right? The nature of software is changing the nature of business and consumer expectations. Tesla is another beautiful example of how technology is completely eating the world. They've completely redefined the way that you interact with your car, the way that you update and upgrade your car, the way that you sell your car. In New Jersey, here where I live, because these guys were using a new model to sell cars, selling directly to consumers, New Jersey, the state where I live, was trying to sue them out of business, trying to litigate them out of business because they didn't know how to deal with them, right? And the reality is that they're completely disrupting auto maintenance, right? Over-the-air fixes. You need to get your car fixed? I'll send you an upgrade, a software upgrade, and it's fixed. You want to update, get a new feature in your car? I'll send you the upgrade over the internet. Amazing ability that no car company can really do yet today. And they're redefining how technology works, how consumers interact with that technology, and who works inside Tesla. Netflix, same thing, has done away with things like the video store and Blockbuster, right? The way we consume information, the way that we distribute it is a whole new paradigm for the way that we build these companies and these products. Now, what's interesting is that we have taken the assembly line model, that industrial manufacturing model that worked well in factories, and we've applied it to technology. Now, the reason we've done that is because it seemed to work so well in factories, right? And in factories, everything is known, right? You know what you're making. You know what it costs to make it. You know what it's going to look like when it's done, and you know pretty much what people are going to do with it when it's finished. And so nothing, because everything is known, we optimize that process for efficiency and productivity. We build assembly lines. And that model seemed to work really well, and we applied it to software, where we've built these processes and silos where the work passes from silo to silo to silo. People do their thing, and we try to create essentially this software factory. where every discipline just kind of sees their little view on the world. They apply their coat of paint or the door to the software, and we hope that it works. But in reality, software is different. It doesn't work this way. And perhaps the most fundamental change for technology is this, that software is continuous, right? Software never ends. Maybe there was a time where software was like delivering a car, where there was a finished product. But the reality is that the DevOps movement, continuous delivery, continuous integration, collaboration between teams, has built this continuous loop of software delivery. We can ship new ideas, new features as quickly as we want. In fact, our friends over at Amazon ship code to production every 11.6 seconds. 5 times a minute, they're putting new ideas into market. They are sensing whether those ideas have a positive impact on customer behavior, and then they're responding equally as fast to what they've sensed. If what they put out there has a positive impact on customer behavior, they scale it out and they do more. And if what they're doing has a negative impact on customer behavior, they roll it back. They learn why it didn't work, and they do it again and they try again. Now, what's interesting is the continuous nature of software has fundamentally shifted the way that we work on product. I don't know how many of you got these discs in the mail in Hungary. I assume not that many. I was responsible for the technology that went on these discs, on these CDs back in the 90s. I worked on the software on this, and we would send 15 million of these. The way that we worked was we would work for 6 to 9 months to get everything perfect, get everything on this disc, the Gold Master. The Gold Master was the disc that all the other discs were copied from. And then we would print 15 million copies of this and ship it to people around the house. And that's how software was delivered back then. It was in a box, and people would install it or not, and we'd wait for feedback, and then we'd work for another 6 to 9 months. So your feedback loop was 12 to 18 months, not 11.6 seconds. Now, in this reality, where you got a 12-month feedback loop, maybe the software factory model works okay because you've got to get something out at a certain point, right? But the reality is in that with continuous software, assembly lines, industrial error management tactics don't work because software is complex and unpredictable. We can't predict the end state because there is no end state. We can't predict the cost. We don't know what it's going to look like exactly. And I think most importantly, we can't predict how customers are going to use it. And so we can't ask our teams to predict exactly what they're going to do, when it's going to be done, and how successful it's actually going to be. And so the 3 questions that I want to answer with the rest of this presentation is this. What does a continuous world mean for the way that we design our organizations, right? The technology is there. How do we rearrange the people and the way that they work around it to take advantage of it? In a sense and respond continuous world, you have a flood of information coming towards you. How can we take advantage of all of this information? And then most importantly, how can we maximize the creativity and the learning and the productivity of our teams to take advantage of all this new information and this ability to continually optimize and improve our software? Now, the reality is this. To survive in this world of continuous change, we have to build a culture of innovation. Now, that's a bit of a buzzword. It doesn't really give you specifics, and I want to give you specifics. The thing to take away here is that a culture of innovation is a culture of learning. It's a culture of experimentation. It's a culture where teams work to understand where their products meet their customers' needs and where they don't, and then to optimize at the speed of the market. Now, there's 2 ways to approach product delivery. My friend Dave Gray in The Connected Company talks about a concept called deliberate strategy. Right? Deliberate strategy is one that's determined by executives and handed down for the teams to execute. It assumes all the creative power is in the executive suite with the management layer, and that we are just handing things off to our teams to build those, and we assume exactly what's going to happen. Right? And when we do that, we end up with products like this. Right? We know exactly what we're building. Right? We know how it will work, but we have no idea what people are going to do with it. Right? You get Segway, for example. How did that work out? Right? The future that Dean Kamen envisioned when he invented this never came to fruition. And these things are basically used now by mall cops and tourists around cities. Conversely, we want to think about our work in an emergent way, right? Emergent strategy is organic. It lets companies learn and continue to develop new strategies, and it pushes power and decision-making to the teams because it builds this culture of learning, this culture of experimentation. Now, this approach is organic. It's from the bottom up, right? We give teams the autonomy to learn, to run experiments, and we build enough slack in our system to support this experimentation because we can't disrupt our core business. We want to make sure that the business moves forward while we continue to learn. And you start to see this in some of the most successful companies in the world. Again, our friend Jeff Bezos says, look, you need to set up and organize so that you can do as many experiments per unit of time as possible. Now, a lot of companies have taken this to heart and they said, great, let's build an innovation lab. That should do it, right? That's how we get some of this. And the reality is no, because these things are rarely aligned with corporate strategy. People are just trying stuff out. And handing things off from the lab to production is tricky, right? The team that made the idea doesn't go with the product. The culture of the lab is different than the rest of the company. The priorities of the IT team are different than the lab. There's no incentive for people outside of the labs to make these products successful. And so their mission is to be innovative, but not solve real customer problems. And you see this with companies all over the world. eBay shut down their innovation lab. Nordstrom shut down their innovation lab, and it doesn't really work. So the question is, how do we start to drive a culture of innovation and learning without all of these special ideas? And the reality is this: the atomic unit of innovation is the team. We want to work together in a team to help drive learning, to help drive innovation. And there's three elements to continuously learning teams that I want to cover. One is going to be the anatomy of the team. The second is how we incentivize that team. And the third is how should the team work? In other words, what kind of processes? Should they be agile? Should they be lean? Right? I want to take a look at each one of these elements and give you some tips for structuring your teams, incentivizing your teams, and then having your teams work together. Let's start with the anatomy of the team. Okay? Anti-patterns. Right? Things that we should not be doing when it comes to building continuously learning teams. The first is this: we don't want to build silos, discipline-specific silos. Have a design team, an engineering team, a marketing team, right? Discipline silos fail because they isolate team members. They diminish communication, which makes teams rely on written documentation much more. People feel like they're in a factory, right? Things come through design, then they go to development, and document handoffs become negotiation point. People start to feel like service providers. They don't feel like they own the whole product. I just do my little bit, and then it goes to somebody else. I don't feel strategic in the process. Perhaps most importantly, siloed teams don't have a view of the whole, right? Who are we building the product for? What pain points are we trying to solve? How do we know we're building the right thing? People are just looking at the idea through a keyhole without a broad view of how those ideas impact the product, the portfolio, or the whole company vision. And I think the worst thing here is when you've got siloed teams, they don't collaborate. And when they don't collaborate, they don't learn from each other, they don't build on each other's ideas, they're implementing somebody else's vision and not their own. And so the question then becomes, what team structure facilitates a culture of learning? And there's four elements that make for a successful team. The first is this: keep your team small. Right? Jeff Bezos calls them 2 pizza teams. 6 to 8 people, you should be able to feed them with 2 pizzas. Small teams are great for communication. They're great for management. You know who is on the team. And most importantly, they're great for accountability. Right? If you're the designer on a team and you don't do your job, people know you're not doing your job. Right? There's nowhere to hide on a small team. Keep your team small. Keep your teams co-located. Everybody in the same space, sitting next to each other. Right? Even different floors might as well be different countries. Put everybody together in the same space, working together. Now, I understand that co-location is not possible for a lot of us. So if you're not co-located, your teams at least have to be awake at the same time. There are tools to drive collaboration these days, but if you're not awake at the same time, it doesn't matter. We've got co-located teams. Your teams should be dedicated. Everybody's working on the same project. No one is getting siphoned off to work on other bugs or other projects or the CEO's pet initiative, because that takes time away from this project. Your teammates are depending on you to do your work. And there's the cost of context switching ends up costing your team time. So we've got small, co-located, dedicated, and lastly, self-sufficient. This is the most important thing. Your team needs to be able to do everything that it needs to do to ship product with as little outside help as possible. They need to be able to code, to design, to ship, to test. They need to be able to roll ideas back, and they have to have the empowerment to make all these decisions at the speed of continuous feedback. Right? If you're shipping product every 11.6 seconds and you're getting information back, you don't have time to run every decision up and down the management chain. You've got to empower your teams to make those decisions, those tactical decisions, because they're the closest ones to the market, they're the closest ones to the customer, and they're the closest ones to that information. So small, co-located, dedicated, self-sufficient. That's the way you want to structure your teams. Now, the next question is, how do you incentivize the team? Right? How do you give teams the right goals to reach for and motivate for the best kind of learning and the best kind of innovation? You could do this, what's on the screen, you could just yell at them. I had a boss who did that once. Right? Just yelled at us to do whatever he needed. But that doesn't work very well. People eventually quit or they go work somewhere else. And there are other anti-patterns as well that we should cover. I think one of my favorite anti-patterns for incentivizing teams is roadmaps. Roadmaps tell a good story. Right? You're here and we're going there. Right? And there's 5 steps between here and there. Right? Except these things are lies. Right? In reality, they actually look like this. Right? Roadmaps give the impression of progress. They give the impression that you've got fixed time and fixed scope projects. But the reality is when you fix time and you fix scope, 3 things happen. Right? You either move the deadline, you reduce scope, or everybody works in crunch mode. Do you guys have crunch mode? 80-hour weeks to hit the deadline, and then everybody quits and goes to work somewhere else. Right? So roadmaps are really, not telling the right story because software is complex and unpredictable. We don't know exactly where we're headed. So how do others do it? Right? Guilt Group says we don't maintain a roadmap. Their roadmap is simply a set of initiatives, and every few months we revisit the prioritization of those initiatives. Is this still the right thing to work on? Right? And if not, they change their prioritization. And this is exactly what Kent Beck, one of the architects of Agile, tweeted. This is now, wow, this is almost, this is 3.5 years old at this point. He says, look, roadmaps should be lists of questions, not lists of features. In other words, roadmaps shouldn't be, we will build X. Roadmaps should be, should we build X? And then we incentivize our teams to go find out if they should build X. Because when we make feature-based roadmaps, what we do is we incentivize our teams for creating output. Output are features. Features bloat our product. Right? And we get into this Frankenstein design thing. This guitar, this is the Microsoft Word version of a guitar. Right? 95% of these features on this guitar are useless to 100% of the population, right? 99% of the population. This is a guitar created for Pat Metheny. He's the only one who can play this entire guitar. And when we incentivize our teams to create features, they're just strapping on features to the product because that's what we're incentivizing them to do. That's what's on the roadmap, right? We deploy the products, get bloated, but we don't know if these features are being used, if they're helping our customers, if they're achieving our business goals. And there has to be a way for the teams to find this out before they deploy everything to build these Frankenstein products. Because at the end of the day, shipping product on its own is not a measure of success. Right? You can launch all the features in the world and they can still suck. You guys remember Google Wave? That was a good product, right? Not really. People just kind of launched it and the launch was celebrated as a success. But launching is the beginning of the conversation with customers, right? We keep shipping features. We end up in situations like this. We force our customers to do things like this, is to hack through our products to get to the features that they actually want and get all the crap out of the way. We don't want to build things that people don't want. Now look, most companies manage to output. They manage to output Because it's easy. It's binary. It's easy to manage, right? Did you ship the feature or did you not ship the feature? Like, that's easy to manage. It's easy to measure. That's why it's easy to manage. Instead, we want to task our teams to achieve business outcomes, measurable changes in customer behaviors. And the way that we do that is that we give them a problem to solve, not a solution to implement. That's the incentive structure. Go solve this problem. And success is measured as an outcome. Did you change customer behavior? Now, what's interesting is that when you incentivize teams with outcomes, it gets messy. It's a can of worms, right? Isn't that a gross picture? I don't know how big it is on the screen. It's probably pretty big, I assume. It gets really messy to measure for outcomes because they're not binary, right? They're honest. It becomes more difficult to manage. I was on a team that was given the task of moving a customer outcome from 14% to 75%. We worked together as a collaborative cross-functional team to brainstorm some ideas. And the customer behavior that we were working on successfully moved from a 14% behavior to a 38% behavior after 3 months worth of work. At the end of that time, we came up in front of our organization and we said, we're at 38%. You said 75. What do you want to do? And I think if you're the manager of that team, what's the reality? Did that team succeed? Did that team fail? Well, let's see. What did they learn? How much time did they spend? What will they do next? And so we asked for another 3 months worth of funding to work on this initiative. And the company said, yes, you can have 3 more months. And we worked for 3 more months and we got to 68%. And at the end of 6 months, the company said, terrific, you're close enough to 75%. You've changed customer behavior meaningfully. You can move on to a new project. The features that we shipped on that project were never dictated by anybody except us. We chose the features that worked, we designed them, we implemented them. And the motivation, the creativity, and the collaboration of the team were unmatched with the other teams at the company. And this is exactly the model that we've been talking about. We've got small teams working to ship product, sense whether it's working, and respond to it. And at the end of, let's say, a quarter, they come up in front of their stakeholders and they say, look, we've been trying to solve this problem for a quarter. Here's what we've achieved. Here are the changes in behavior. Here's what we've learned. And if you give us another round of funding, we'll go for another 3 months. What you've done is you've empowered your management layer to make an evidence-based funding decision at this point. And if the management layer decides, hey, this is going well, they're learning, they're making progress, let's fund them again, right? Or they may decide, you know what, this isn't going to work, or you've gone far enough. We want you to move on to a new outcome or a new OKR to move that forward. So this is the best way to incentivize collaboration and learning in your teams. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is how should the teams work, right? What is the process? Should they be lean? Should they be agile? And I'm going to give you some anti-patterns for poor ways of working, and then we'll talk about exactly how to work. No cross-functional collaboration. These are more pictures from the circus. You thought you'd get away from my circus stories, not so fast. This is, if you're looking from left to right, you've got the elephant act. You've got these women in the center who walked on balls up ramps. That was their trick. And the guy on the right, that's Charlie. He cooked our meals. And if you chose to eat them, you got to eat with Charlie 3 times a day. Now, there was no collaboration in the circus whatsoever, right? People had their act, and that's what they did. Can you imagine what would happen if we had a tiger act, if the tiger trainer and the human cannonball collaborated, right? All of a sudden, if he's flying over tigers, right, that becomes far more exciting, right? They didn't do any of that, right? Cross-functional collaboration drives that creativity and those new ideas, right? We have to drive the conversations between product design and engineering. We have to get off of these ideas of job titles, right? We love job titles because they put people in boxes and we tell them what they can and can't do. But as soon as you do that, we limit people's creativity and their contribution. People can generally do more than one thing, right? Some engineers can design, some designers can code, some product managers can code, people can do research, they're really good at giving presentations. Let people do what they're good at, especially as you're trying to discover what to work on and how to implement it. people will fall back to their primary competencies when it's time to actually execute the work, but give them the opportunity to contribute. Let me show you an example of that. Anybody know who this is? I guess you can't really tell me because I can't really hear. I'll tell you who this is. This is a guy named Jeff Skunk Baxter. Jeff Skunk Baxter is a famous guitarist. He was in the Doobie Brothers, and he was in Steely Dan, and he is in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He's a legendary, talented. This is a Muppet. If you know the Muppets, the guitarist in the Muppet Band is designed after this guy. Okay? This is what he does today. He's an advisor to the U.S. government on missile defense. Not even in a Trump administration. Just, right? If this guy came to you and he said, look, I want to be an advisor on missile defense, and you're like, you're this legendary guitarist, what the hell do you know about missiles? Right? That's the same kind of stuff with our colleagues. Right? Our colleagues come in and they say, you're an engineer, right? What do you know about design? Well, it turns out people have secondary competencies. We have to explore what people are good at and let them contribute in whatever way works. Okay? Another anti-pattern is fear of failure. This ability to, people want to feel like their ass is on the line, if you will. Right? People don't think about it. If you fail, you get fired. But the reality is that the scope of failure is rarely considered. Right? If a culture of innovation is a culture of learning, learning can only come from small failures. We have to build the ability for teams to not feel like they're going to get fired if they do something wrong. Random deadlines. Right? Deadlines are generally just made up. They're a motivation tool. They're not an incentive structure. Right? What we're doing again is we're setting our teams up to fail by fixing time and scope with these random deadlines, right? And what the teams end up doing is building the CYA culture, right? This cover your ass culture. And so the question then becomes, how does this culture of learning change the way that the team works, right? And we take inspiration, we take the principles, and we take the values of lean, and we take the values of agile, and we apply them to our team. And however they manifest on your teams is the best way that it works for your team. But the values that we're looking for are, we want to take smaller risks, right? Lean thinking says we're always moving from doubt to certainty, right? We can't predict the future. And so we work in small batches to make sure that we don't go too far in the wrong direction, right? This is a picture I found on the internet, right? But this could be a prototype for the first GoPro, right? Let's make sure that people actually want to see these crazy videos from the hood of a car, right? If a product roadmap is a list of questions, let's start answering those questions by taking small risks. Let your teams take those risks, right? This is a modal overlay in an app called Map My Run that says, hey, do you want to take some photos while you're tracking your run while you're running, right? And if people say yes, and they tell you how much they want to pay for it, that's a small risk. You didn't actually have to build this product or any of these products at all in advance of learning whether or not this is something you should work on. Remember, should we work on it, right? We give our teams clear definitions of success. We give them metrics. We give them outcomes, not deadlines. And we let them figure out how to drive that customer behavior. If we make our customers successful, we make ourselves successful. Customer value and business value are the same thing. We want to promote competencies over roles. Let everybody on the team provide whatever competencies make sense. Don't limit the team's success simply because they have explicit job titles. And let those competencies self-organize. This is a quote from Jeff Nicholson, who invented the Post-it note. The Post-it note, the raw material of innovation, right? The best architectures, the best ideas, the best designs come from self-organizing teams because they feel trusted and empowered. Don't impose your process on teams. Let them figure out how to work together in the best way. Structure them in the best way, give them those incentives, and then give them the freedom to be creative to reach those business goals, and then get out of your way, right? Jeff Nicholson says they try to put Six Sigma, which is a production optimization process, on top of the Post-it note process. We had no idea whether this was something that people even wanted, right? And so to wrap up, right, I've told you a lot of different things. I've told you a lot of different ways to change the way that you work, the way that you structure your teams, the way that you manage your teams. And it's a lot of change, right? Why should you do this? And there's 3 reasons why you should do this. If you do this, you're going to make your customers happy. That's first and foremost, because you're going to build products that they actually want, that solve real problems for them in a meaningful way. You're going to reduce waste by building more successful products and spending less time on ideas that fail. We want to build things that people actually want. And then ultimately, you're going to drive employee morale up because people are going to feel like they're a part of the mission. They're going to feel passionate about the project. They're going to be loyal to the team and to the company. They're not going to feel like they're a cog in the machine. They're going to stick around longer. They're not going to quit. And they're going to invite their smart friends to come work with you on these great projects. Here's the bottom line. To build successful innovation teams, you have to transform your culture from one focused on delivery to one focused on learning. Thanks very much for listening, and thanks for having me.
Can we keep Jeff for questions, or is he gone? Seems to be gone pretty much, right? You know, there's one interesting thing about Jeff Skunk Baxter, who he mentioned in his speech. He's a guitar player, and he takes part in a collaboration. Are you there, Jeff?
I am.
Yeah, I wanted to tell you about Skunk, whom I interviewed in Washington.
You did?
Yeah. Do you know that he plays in a band called Coalition of the Willing, led by an ex-Hungarian U.S. ambassador, András Simonyi?
Wow.
So, you know, Hungarians are good leaders. This is a band with a multinational force armed with musical instruments of mass destruction.
Wow.
You should listen to the Coalition of the Willing.
I had no idea. I'm going to have to look this up.
Okay, so that's Jeff Skunk Baxter's, besides giving advice to the Pentagon how to blow up terrorists. That's him today. So you got a whole bunch of questions that I actually have some of them in front of me. Okay, we got some of them. How is it possible to support innovation and learning, which have high risks and uncertain payoffs, in a highly resource-constrained environment? Do you see the questions in front of you?
Yeah, I'm reading it now. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Support innovation learning, which have high risks and uncertain payoffs. Look, I think every company is resource constrained to some extent or another. Particularly true in smaller companies. Obviously, I think that the culture of learning is exactly the kind of culture that you'd like to build to make sure that you're spending your resources on the right efforts, right? So imagine if you're highly resource constrained, let's say you're a startup or a high growth company with 10, 20, 30 employees, you can't take bets the size of Amazon, first of all. You've got to take those smaller bets. And the question is, how much time should you spend on them? When should you move on to the next thing? And I think that by giving your teams the opportunity to figure out very quickly if these are the right things to work on, they can make an evidence-based decision that says, yes, this is something that we should continue to pursue or not. And the conversation, the conversation should be structured around short cycles, right? So in my presentation, I talked about quarters, but maybe because you're a smaller team, your cycle time should be a month or even 2 weeks. And at the end of 2 weeks, the team gets together with the leadership and says, here's what we've learned in 2 weeks about this. It seems like there's enough evidence here for us to work another 2 weeks on this, right? Or another month on this. And so you've got to bake those check-in points into the process and then make those evidence-based decisions about whether this is something that we should continue doing or not doing. And the toughest part, believe me, and this is I've been practicing this way of working for a long time, and it's still difficult for me because we love our ideas and we think they're brilliant ideas. The toughest part is to stop working on something. If the evidence continuously comes back and says, this is not a good idea, you've got to move on to the next thing.
Okay. We got another question pushed up on the popularity list, but let me first go with Reka. She's asking, how do you establish innovation teams and methods in a highly regulated business and work environment? Any good advice?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple thoughts here. First and foremost, you've got to have your subject matter experts on your team. So if you're in a medical field, you've got to have the medical subject matter expert in that tight cross-functional collaboration. Now, second, the way to support this way of working, and I spent the last 6 months working with a bank, so highly regulated, and they're trying to start to build this way of working. The non-technical disciplines, so if you think about, say, product design and engineering as the technical disciplines, for the non-technical disciplines, HR, finance, legal, risk, compliance, right? We need to change the way that those teams work, that those disciplines interact and collaborate with that core team. So in the past, it's pretty much, like it's a gated process. The team would work for a while, and then they go to finance, they go to legal, and legal says, it's not legal, go back. And they work again. Is it legal now? It's not legal. Go back and do it again, right? Same thing goes for HR. Can you hire us these kinds of people? That's not the right kind of person. They go back, they hire again. That pace is not going to support this continuous feedback and continuous learning loop. What we need to do is we need to start to engage those disciplines like legal, like risk, in a more continuous interaction with the core teams. Now, they don't have to be on the teams full time, but they have to be in touch with those teams in a regular basis. One of our favorite mantras is do less more often. So if your legal review is this big and it happens once a quarter, do a legal review this big and do it once a week, right? And then another week and another week, so that teams are getting regular feedback and being nudged in a direction that says this is a better way of working, this is a more legal way of working, this is a more compliant way of working. That's the key. So the key is to have your subject matter expertise on your core team, and then to support that core team with those non-technical disciplines on a more regular, lower scope basis.
Jeff, if I know it correctly, you finally have an actual flight that's not canceled, so I should let you go. Thank you very much for being with us.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, and I look forward to seeing you guys hopefully next year. Thank you.